So, welcome to monitoring your production Vue apps. My name is Abhijeet, but most people call me Abby. I currently work at Sentry. I help maintain Sentry's Vue SDK and its other JavaScript SDKs. So my full-time workday is working on open source and doing this stuff. And I've learned a lot at Sentry about thinking about how do we, grab information in production and surface it to developers so they can solve their problems. This is what I'd like to talk to you about today, but unfortunately, I think I chose like the most boring talk title ever. A lot of people didn't really know what this meant, so I'm going to actually try to break it down for you. Monitoring your production Vue apps. We're going to be talking about Vue, but a lot of the lessons that we learned here right now, you can use it other frameworks, vanilla JavaScript, just plain HTML, it all still applies. But I'll try to include some Vue examples for all of you. We're talking about monitoring, which is quite the loaded term. It means a lot of different things. But for the purposes of today's talk, to keep it short, we're not going to be talking about any analytics or user behavior stuff. Let's keep things developer focused for now. Not going to talk about error monitoring because you should just use Sentry. And if you have more questions, come see me at the booth. Instead, we're going to be talking about performance monitoring. So you're in production. Is your application reliable, stable, and fast? Mainly, we're trying to answer two questions. One, am I building good user experiences that when somebody loads my site or web application, they feel confident using it, behaviors are expected, and things feel fast and smooth? And two, am I respecting the user's resources? Are they, for example, am I not like completely consuming somebody's data plan or, destroying their machine when they try to load my site? And with this comes kind of like a mindset shift though, because unlike traditional, I think, software performance where you're looking at the number, you're measuring your CPU, looking at memory, front-end performance is fundamentally all about the user. Every operation that somebody does on a web app, on your Vue application, is they're loading a page, they're clicking a button, they're scrolling, they're adding inputs. It's all driven by the user. This also means if the user feels that your app is not reliable, stable, or fast, no matter what optimizations you did to it, no matter what re-renders you got rid of or what JavaScript you cut, doesn't matter. It's still slow. Next kind of comes this idea of production, which I think is really important. We have a lot of really cool tools nowadays to do a lot of things pre-production. As you're developing, you have your dev tools, you have testing tools, you have CI/CD that gives you a lot of insights into on your dev machine or in a CI pipeline, what's going on. And this though is all just what we call lab data, which is, it's synthetic. Usually you're using fake user accounts, you're using a developer account. Maybe you have 1 or 2 or 3 scenarios that you're testing for, but the more advanced your web application, the more users you have. Think about it. The amount of kind of permutations of what could change, what could happen, it explodes. Maybe with like, let alone 10 users to like 100,000, right? This is why monitoring in production is so important, because now you're going to, in the field, on your users' devices, figuring out how they're using your application and what ends up being slow and what ends up being fast. So this is an example of like lab data. Of course, you have great dev tools available for you. You can run in with your browser dev tools. There's a performance tab, network tab. You get a lot of like cool information, but that's just for you and your test account and maybe your QA team, right? It's not for every single user you have. And fundamentally, the more users you have, there ends up being a section of your users you just are not understanding. And since front-end performance is all about the users, if you're not measuring in production, you're kind of losing out on what actually the performance of your application is. There's a lot of factors that kind of go into front-end performance in terms of like inputs. I wrote like a couple of them down here, but this is not everything. What's important to notice here, there's a couple things that are completely out of your control, which is unlike if you're writing like a backend server-side application. you're deploying it, you know what server you're using, you kind of control everything about it, but you can't really control the network conditions or what user hardware. Someone might be surfing your app on a smart TV. You can't control that. Same thing with browser. The type of user maybe you can control, but again, as more complicated your app gets, the more kinds of users, the more maybe advanced permission models. And then there's a lot of ambient conditions, things about the network, the backend, the caching, both on the CDN side and the browser, which you have slight control over. But in reality, you have to treat as if, sometimes what if it goes all wrong, or what if it just doesn't work properly? And with all this complicated factors, plus knowing that somebody's actively trying to use it and driving experiences, front-end app performance gets complicated. But it's also why I think it's super fun to think about. So with that in mind, thinking about, let's try to find some problems in production. How do we go about this? Where do we find these problems? What do we have to start looking at? In order to get that started, let's think about how somebody's going to use your web app. There's two primary operations to think about. First is somebody goes into a browser and types in a URL to your web app, and they render the page. This is a page load. Or if they end up clicking links and then do client-side navigations, where some DOM nodes re-render. This is rendering. Super important because this is how fundamentally everybody's going to interact with your app. And if something's just stuck in an infinite loading spinner, or skeleton state's weird, or the layout's all shifting, it's going to be a really negative experience for your users. Which is why most tools out there, you do Lighthouse reports or any kind of metric supporting like this, is really focused on rendering and helping fix this. The other operation, though, is pretty important. And if your app type is relying on this, it's user interaction. So this is clicks, scrolls, inputs, drop-downs, and anything that is user interacting with stuff on the page. This is fundamentally, though, a little harder to conceptualize because it's not just my page is loaded and all my components are there and okay, I just have to see how fast that gets. User interactions, you have to think about, does things feel smooth? Do they feel janky? How long do event handlers last? Do I include how long after an event handler fires the requests and put that into timing? And so this is a little harder to think about. And you actually find that if you go out into the industry and think about, again, you try to look at performance resources, 90% of stuff is focused on rendering a page. Not much on user interactions, but we'll try to cover both. So with that in mind, we know our operations. We know we want to look in production because we want to get as many users as possible to get an understanding of what your app is actually doing. The best thing to do is just to start measuring stuff. Quantitative is really the best. Any kind of numbers, but it's fine if it's qualitative. Really what you're looking for is something to give you an indication of the problem and to be able to say that I started from somewhere and I made some improvements and now I'm here. Also helps to justify to your managers and stuff so that you can actually do this work. Having measurements, especially in production, is also really nice because it helps guard against regressions. So you deploy something and you make some changes. In the age of continuous integration, people are shipping multiple times a day. And you want to make sure that a change you made to a page or adding new components or maybe changing a code splitting strategy is not slowing down your app massively or making it unusable for a certain section of your users. In short, by starting to measure stuff, you have to figure out your high-level indicators, which are just high-level metrics that you can then use to know, hey, I have a problem, I have to figure it out. In order to do this, you'll need your statistics, but don't worry, it's just like high school math, mean, median, mode, and percentiles, things that you can look up, do a couple of Khan Academy lessons on. The most important of this is sample size, though, because if you're monitoring production, you're monitoring many different users, many different web sessions, and suddenly the amount of data points explodes. And so if you want to do more sophisticated analysis to actually determine if something is slow, you have to make sure that hey, is my data actually statistically significant? Is this worthwhile me paying attention to it? And, but thankfully it's not that complicated. You'll also hopefully need to visualize this somehow, recommend things like histograms or bar charts or things, because this is often time series data that again has percentiles, mean, immediate. And lastly, there's this thing about cardinality, which really only, you don't have to worry about too much. You'll hear it come up. It's this idea that every single point of data that you end up sending about how fast things are running, maybe durations or maybe load times, you want to attach extra data to it, which like maybe you want to say what type of user they are, what browser they're in, what network conditions, 3G or 4G. Maybe you want to add some information about what metadata about your specific web app. This kind of explodes the kind of pivots that you can use. So for example, maybe you're analyzing the average page load for only this specific type of user. In short though, brushing up on your statistics, learning some visualizations, just gives you the confidence in your data and what it means. But it's not totally required. As long as you honestly just understand mean, median, mode, and percentiles, you're good to go to start monitoring your apps in production. So let's walk through some of these high-level indicators and how you can start measuring them. The first one, which I really like and is super easy for you to start doing today, is asset sizes. So as a show of hands, who measures their bundle size today or how much JavaScript they send to their users? Also me. That screenshot actually is from the SDK I work on, where we did this big initiative to try to cut bundle size by over 29%. And there's a ton of tools for you to easily be able to do this. There's GitHub Actions, there's Vite and Webpack plugins that you can add today that start generating this data, and then it's up to you to where you want to store it. I recommend using something like a GitHub Action so you can just put it on the PR, but you can send it to an external data store, upload it to a bucket somewhere, and just do analysis on it over time. This one's really easy because more bundle size means that it's more cost for somebody to load, but it also inherently has a relationship to JavaScript parse time, which blocks the main thread, which obviously makes things slower. You can also measure every other asset you load too. Things like images, CSS, and fonts. You might have to play around with your server to actually get this timing data. But measuring this is such an easy way to figure out what exactly you're sending to your users, because that has a direct correlation with how fast things are on your site. Another thing that people don't really do at all is actually measure how big their payloads are. This is really easy just to think that like, oh, I can send whatever I want from my API. It doesn't really matter. But in fact, bigger payloads have many different costs, right? Again, it's up to somebody has to download this. And if they're on a limited data plan, you just kind of wasted their money. And also parsing payloads and doing things with it has a cost. And this could affect performance. These are all really easy numbers that you could probably go back and add today after you kind of figure out how to get them. The next kind of high-level indicator is what I mentioned here and there. It's the idea of durations or load times. How long does something take to render? The most common of which is the Google Chrome team has provided something called Web Vitals, which is actually even used for things like SEO. It's probably seen everywhere. You can there's tools like Lighthouse that will automatically generate these for you. The thing about these Web Vitals though is you can actually grab them in production. Google Chrome has a library for this, and you can install and add. It's like barely anything in terms of bundle size, and then you can report and start adding these metrics. Today, in fact, you can go look it up. It's on their GitHub. The Sentry SDK actually just uses this under the hood because it's really good. Some of these numbers are just really important to keep track over time. Things like first contentful paint, which tells you, okay, what was that? The time it took for something to even just show up on my screen is really important, because if that's long, it just means somebody was staring at a white screen for a while until something rendered. Some of the other ones are a little more tricky and nuanced. They might require additional metadata to be attached to it. For example, something like LCP. This is because LCP can actually lie. And actually, a lot of the Web Vitals can. And any metric that you add actually can lie too. It's because at the end of the day, these are all just heuristics, right? They're metrics that you attach that you're assigning some meaning to, but based on the underlying conditions, they could end up being wrong or inaccurate. So don't tie yourself down to the metric. Just use it as a high-level indicator to think that like, hey, I have a problem somewhere, I need to go fix it. LCP actually specifically sucks though, because to go back, the way LCP works is that it's the largest contentful page. It emits timing data when the most important or valid element on the page renders. Usually this is a big text block or a big image, and that's really useful, right? Like let's say you have an e-commerce store and you want to make sure that the image of your product loads as fast as possible because that's when you kind of consider the page usable because you want them able to see what's going on. The problem here though is that inherently this is a heuristic again. And so even if the LCP or what the browser guesses is the most important element renders, it might actually not be the most important element to you. Let's say you have, again, like a checkout page. There's like a big image on top, maybe some example text, and those things render really fast. And LCP is like, you have a great site. It all loads in 1 second. Amazing job. The only problem is there's a checkout button right at the bottom, and that took like 4 or 5 seconds to load. And even if all your metrics are telling you, hey, you have a great FCP, LCP, page load time, your checkout button took 5 seconds to load, people are just going to bounce off your site. This is also why, aside from these high-level indicators that like people in the web dev community tell you to use, like Chrome's Web Vitals, for example, I recommend actually going in and just adding simple timings to your Vue components. Vue is great because it exposes a ton of lifecycle hooks, and you can just use this and emit simple marks and measures to say, at this time my component mounted, or at this time my component updated. And you can actually track this alongside your LCP and your FCP to say, as my page is loading, these components are loading in and out. And maybe you have components that you really care about, that you know for your user, the page is only usable after that exists. So you can say, hey, on mount, add a mark, add a timestamp saying, this is when something mounted. Under the hood, the performance API, it's part of the core browser spec, emits something called performance entries. This stuff is really cool. You can use both the browser's performance APIs as well as just arbitrary things that are happening. The browser will record them all into a timeline they call performance entry. So at the beginning of your application, you can record a performance observer and collect all of this data. So here, for example, I just grabbed this off the MDN docs for performance entries. I have a couple of marks I register and a measure that kind of measures duration. And then I have a performance observer that kind of records this and emits this. And you can take this information and then send it wherever you want. You can also tag additional information to it, add information about the user or the browser or whatever you really want. Any additional context that you need to kind of get a full understanding of why this loaded this way. And another cool thing about the performance entries is it's not just like these performance marks and measures that you can add. Although these are really useful, you put them all around your components and all this. The browser actually automatically records a whole bunch of these. And so this I just took as a screenshot from the Vue docs. Vue 3 docs, really nice. And side by side, one is like on the left is the network tab, which basically shows all my assets as they're being loaded, my HTML, my CSS, my JavaScript, and so on. You can also see some images and things like this. On the right, I'm just in the console, that same window, and I call it performance.getEntries. And you can try this out right now if you have a laptop in front of you. You just go to your site and performance.getEntries, and you can actually see whatever is in this network tab is available there programmatically, including information about request size, how long it took to make the connection to the server, how long it took to grab the asset. And this is for CSS, JavaScript, images, fonts, fetch requests, XHR requests, and more. All this information is already captured for you by the browser automatically. This means that you can set up a performance observer or use performance.getEntries, grab this data, maybe pick the most important things that you think are important, maybe JavaScript files that you know are important, or images or fonts that you know maybe could be problematic, and you can record them and send them to wherever you want over time. and you could track different timing information and track different information about how it is. This is basically, you can then recreate all the information you get with the network tab, minus a couple things because they hide some things for security reasons, in your own backend somewhere. What I recommend to just start off is that you just flush it and upload it to a database. You record a whole bunch of them and you export it and you do some analysis in a spreadsheet somewhere. Sounds really basic, nothing fancy, maybe nothing like a developer would do, but to be honest, that's good enough just to get started. And if you do this for a couple pages, maybe the pages you care most about, you kind of start building this habit of collecting this data, doing some analysis, and keeping in mind the numbers that are important. So we covered how to collect some stuff. We covered how easy it is. You can just start adding stuff to your component lifecycles today and start grabbing timing information. There's a lot more to thinking about performance, trying to improve the experience for your users, thinking about what metrics to grab. If you're interested, there's a lot of other extension topics. Two that are really important, thinking about sampling and flushing, because if you have a huge web app used by thousands and thousands of users, you probably don't want to record every single data point because that just gets super expensive. So you probably want some strategy on figuring out what to keep and what not to. Cardinality also gets important because every kind of unique pivot you have on a data point, for example, type of user, browser they're on, and so on, this gets expensive to just store. So you probably want to find a way to minimize that. And there's two really good books that I would recommend if you're interested in this, that go super in-depth into kind of thinking about performance, thinking about usability. There's High Performance Browser Networking. This is written in like 2013, but I think basically everything there still applies and is still really good content. And it includes then some of the stuff that I didn't cover in this talk about caching and HTTP and kind of optimizing your connections. There's also usability engineering, which I also really recommend because, again, front-end performance is about the users and it's fundamentally a people problem. And you can actually solve a ton of problems just with smart UX or better design decisions without having to do the kind of changes of optimizing your components or your fetch requests or so on. And that's basically it. You can find me on Twitter and on the Blue Sky thing, but I'm mostly actually available on GitHub because I work on open source for my job. I would also recommend checking out our open source Vue SDK that does error monitoring. Every single thing I talked about in this talk, about performance entries, about marks and measures, about web vitals, I implemented in our performance SDK. So if you come look at the Sentry JavaScript SDK and you look at our performance monitoring code, it's all there. We use this. A lot of our users use this in production. It works and it's pretty easy. Whoops.